Hi, I'm IKEA, and for today's video, we're going to have an in-depth look, this time into MMRs and how they have changed, as they have received quite the big change, as most of them have gotten a weapon damage base buff, some have gotten an RPM buff, some have gotten nothing, and that has really shifted around which weapons we pick, especially for hotshot, for instance. And that is also the premise of today's video. We're going to look at it in a hotshot build and go over their first shot, their second shot, and their cap shot, as that is going to be the relevant parts, I feel, for this build. And as always, we've put it on a build again. So let's first go over the premise, and then we'll jump into some of the numbers. And for that comparison, again, of course, I'm basing it off a spreadsheet I've prepared, and that is the one on screen. It will, of course, be linked down below, and it is in the burst and sustain tables as well, so you can get to it whenever you want. It's this ZEV 7.0 MMRs hotshot, as it is there. And yeah, its content-wise is hotshot build. As we actually, let's go back into the game and show the builds basically that we'll be discussing. So first off, we're going to discuss hotshot with Chainkiller+Airaldi. First with ungraded weapons, so grade 0 weapons, having them, as that of course affects Headhunter quite strongly. Then we're gonna go with the same build with Chainkiller+Airaldi, and then with grade 25 weapons. Afterwards, of course, there is one other way of setting up the hotshot build, and that is with Habsburg, with 2 pieces of Habsburg, which is, of course, yeah, a hard one to get together and has been the menace for a lot of people. We're going to go there as well, look at the Habsburgs ones. There we're going to have a smattering of gradings because I don't have all grade 25s available for that account, as this is my second account and that has the Habsburg pieces. I don't have that on my main account. And we'll look at the differences there. One other thing as we will go back here is that we are acting as if hotshot is always stacked. And that is, of course, not the case. You have to first take, well, you have to at least take, you have to hit one headshot for the second shot to have the damage component of hotshot be there. What I've done here is actually taken it from the 5th shot onward. So the first 4 shots to get the rotation going, the 5th shot onward is always bonused with that 20%. That is, of course, not going to always be the case. You're not going to start with that. But we needed a consistent number, and for that, because, yeah, you might miss one in between or something like that in actuality. So we're acting as if that 20% is there. And I've not calculated it out, and specifically not calculated that because I didn't want to... that would have opened it up for a lot of input errors. So instead, what I've done is the much more grading thing, the other meaning of that word, which is to go in here and actually get the damage numbers per weapon. And that's also the reason that for later on with the Habsburg, we'll have differing gradings, although it'll still be, you know, it's still a good way of comparing them. But yes, that means that, for instance, as well, we're going to, with the grade 0 weapons, we're going to do all of the weapons, including several that we're going to drop later when we go to the grade 25s. Because I am taking the damage numbers from the games, and I'm not going to grade all those weapons to 25 because some of them aren't really worth it. And there is 2 standouts. And I'll actually already say that, yeah, the Model 700 and the SR-1, as are here, they'll pop up over and over again as my 2 top picks, each for its own reason. And the 2 exotics that have high damage in the Mantis and the Nemesis will show up a lot. And we're going to have the White Death in there at all times, just because that was, of course, the old king. And it very much is the old king at this point. So yeah, let's start off by going over the hotshot without grading. And let's start with the grade 0 weapons and on the Chainkiller+Airaldi variant. On the right there are all the numbers that I took from in-game by just doing the thing, sitting at the range and getting the numbers. For the first shot, it's second shot, and then a capped shot. In all of these cases, it will be 3 shots to cap. together as well as it is up there, as we'll close in a little bit by going here. As I shows there, we are having vigilance is up. Of course, our headhunter is stacking up as it goes. And yeah, indeed, that hotshot is up at its rotating point, which is at 5 shots, meaning that every shot is bonus by that 20%. Now, of course, yeah, again, that is not how it actually works. And we are using determined, so we're basically leaving it either determined or untalented. So, of course, you could squeeze out a little bit more if you're willing to go determined and actually headshot with it and, for instance, go with Ranger or such to get a little bit more damage out. But yeah, here we're comparing them basically as the talent not having a damage component, at least on the weapon. But then, of course, on the gear, it does. Here we have the full set of 2 exotics and all of the weapon types that exist in the Headhunter category, except the fast-firing ones, of course. So the SVD, the Mark 28, and the Mark 22 and the G28, as I melded them together. Those aren't in here, of course, as they don't really fit in this Headhunter. So we have the bolt actions basically in several ways, and the 2 exotics that matter for that as well. We're starting off with them having their base number here, which is just their base value from the game. Now, of course, there are some weapons like the Model 700 and the White Death and this Hunting M44 that can have a +5 weapon damage, for instance, in their integrated magazine slot. And that, of course, brings up their damage by a little bit over this. And that's the reason I wanted to compare them on build, because as well with the White Death, specifically this is the White Death, and we're keeping out the Carbine M44, which would also, of course, be a weapon type. The White Death is just a better Carbine M44. It has the same ability to have the same talents, and it has more headshot than it, as being that name talent of its named thing of it. Being that, we're just leaving out the Carbine M44. But of course, for instance, because of that extra headshot or because of these +5 weapon damages, there is a little bit of variance between the bases and then, of course, their first shot, second shot, and cap shot. Same for the Mantis, which has a talent which is adding in quite a large amplifier as 50% if nothing is targeting you. It's the behind you before behind you wasn't behind you. So yeah, that of course is also contingent on the enemy not targeting you, so it is conditional. But that does mean, for instance, that if we already start going and looking at this first table, which is sorted by the first shot. So here we have the first shot, the second shot, and the cap shot, which for all of these will be, all of them reach their cap shot in 3. On their first shot, which this upper one is sorted by, and later on we'll go towards this one, which is sorted by the third shot, or its cap shot. We are also sorting them the 100% mark, as with the ARs and the LMGs. Because the Nemesis is such an outlier, I didn't want that to be the comparison point, because it makes all the other percentages way too small, and the differences between them hard to parse, basically, quickly. So we're setting the 100% point behind the Nemesis in all cases, with the next up weapon, basically. And yeah, in this case, for instance, that is the Mantis. And the Mantis, of course, is up here because it has that amp. It won't do this. Its base is much lower than the rest, of course. It is basically an SRS. Underneath it, an SRS covert. But with its talents, it is getting here. Now, of course, we could have, for instance, Ranger or something on these other ones to make up for their losses and stuff. So it isn't the fairest comparison. But yeah, it is important to have it here. And there is actually a magic number that kind of matters, which is just below 10 million. Usually we say like 9.8 to 9.9 million, which is the point where you can headshot an elite and get them in one shot. Now, of course, all of these are with hotshot fully active. So you kind of needed to have killed a patrol or something going into a control point if you're wanting to start off the. But say you have reached that 5th shot point, or your second shot, for instance. You can also kind of prepare it like that by just losing your hot shot and then the last guy that is alive headshotting them. So hot shot has 1 stack already, meaning that its amp force applies on the second shot as well. So you can do, creative things like that. If you have that up, actually with the Mantis, even at grade 0 for that build, you can actually start off with an elite, which is an impressive feat. This is of course also down to it's having that 50% amp when it's when that enemy is not targeting you, which is important. If we go on to the other weapons, which are not running a damage talent in effect, we see the two big winners, and they'll be repeating over and over for me. One is the Model 700, the other is the SR-1. And yeah, that is to differentiate the SR-1. That's why I'm going out of my way to call them the Model 700, because there's of course other Model 700s, which is the M700. They aren't called model. So there's a Model M700 Carbon and Tactical exists. And of course, with the SRS or with the SR-1, the SRS exists both in the A1 and in the covert variant. So yes, we'll look at the weapons in the conclusion if you want to visually know the difference between them. But of course, their name is there because, you can just look at their names. What we see in their bases is kind of what will hold true for the rest of their numbers. So we already had, of course, the base values ready in the burst and sustain tables. Although I will say that I had a mistake actually with the White Death and had calculated out with this +5 weapon damage in its magazine slot still, which had a bigger number than this in the burst and sustain tables until a few days ago where I fixed that error. That has moved it down quite a bit. It is actually below the SRS and the M700 on its base already. But then, of course, it has that headshot component. And that actually, with the first shot, where because the weapon damage, the total weapon damage, and the DTH, those go into the Headhunter pool, basically, that gets saved for the second shot. Headshot doesn't, for instance, meaning that actually on the first shot, the White Death kind of competes with the SRS and with the SR1 and the Model 700. And actually, even though it has a lower base, it does beat the SRS and the M700 here. We'll come to that back, actually. Let's actually jump back to Model 700 as I'm kind of jumping the shark. But yeah, the Model 700 is the big winner. It has the highest base. It is a very hard-hitting weapon now. It is a 7-shot, where the White Death, where the Old King used to be a 5-shot. Also, it has its muzzle available for mod, where the White Death had its underbarrel available for mod. The muzzle is much more useful because you can actually take them +20 stability, -10 optimal range, taking its optimal range down from 55 to 50, or from 50 to 45. That is not that big of a loss, and that 20 stability is a lot better than the 10 stability that you could have on a White Death. So the M700, the Model 700, is the big winner, and very much so. It is basically keeping up with a weapon that is having a damage talent base in effect, and even on grade 0, it is kind of close to that point where you could one-shot an elite. We'll look at its other shots later on, but yeah, the Model 700 is the big hard hitter. But my general pick would actually not be it. My general pick would be this SR-1. It is a lower base damage, meaning that that cascades into all of its other shots, but it's basically only here, for instance, it's less than 1 million behind. It is less than 8% behind the Model 700. But what it does have is a lot better handleability. And it has the ability to, first off, you can have 10 rounds with it, 10 rounds that are in a magazine, so it's very easy to reload. That Model 700, every time you hit the reload, it kind of hurts and kind of sucks. Not so much with the SR1. You can quickly reload it, meaning that as well, for instance, on builds where you're not using, for instance, hotshot or not using hotshot's reload mechanic, that helps a lot because now you can actually, run these weapons and not have to deal or die in the reload. And with 2 stability mods on it, both the 20% on the muzzle, taking its actually as well, its optimal range going from 60 to 54, meaning that even with that, it is still ahead of the Model 700 in optimal range as well, which can be a thing. But especially with that and the underbarrel stability mod, it had on hotshot, on the 4 full-piece hotshot and the 2 weapon handlings on the gear, it has no sway. It doesn't have little sway, it has no sway. And that is very handy. That is actually one of my favorite things about this SR1 now on hotshot being very viable, because it always could do that. Although other weapons can do the same. The SRS and the models, the M700 Carbon / Tactical can also reach that point, but the SR1 is the highest hitting one in that. Now, its only real difference between that and the SRSs and the M700s is that it does not have a long rail, but that isn't much of an issue for MMRs, because we're not really going to go flatline with them generally, just because we don't want to lock ourselves into that. Although you could, and together with the recon drone, even keep survivalist, but likely you would go... you would likely go technician with that, which kind of isn't the greatest pick for sniping builds. That TAC 50 on your back is kind of useful. But yeah, you could, for instance, do stuff like that, or even have the reload on the barrel, which the SR1 can't. But those are minor things. That isn't worth this difference that they have, which is dropping quite a bit. And while... all of them, including, of course, the Whitehead in the past, at their cap are much high enough that, yeah, they can kill anything, really, except LMG names. I would still pick an SR1 over an SRS or an M700, because there's not a meaningful difference in them in handling or usability, even though the SRS and the M700, of course, do have 12 rounds, for instance. That 10 rounds is enough for me. 2 more rounds isn't really the difference maker, and their first shot is not that big of a difference again, but I would rather have the higher first shot, guaranteeing that, you know, whatever I'm shooting at will die. Although, really, if you're shooting at a purple or red, they're going to die from any of these. Then we have also the other M44s. They didn't get enough of a buff, really, and they're very much behind. So in the custom M44 and the hunting M44, they are way behind, and I really wouldn't recommend them, especially the custom M44. Having a magazine really doesn't have anything over the others. So yeah, it very much is way behind. There is one other one in here that we do need to talk about, and that's the Tactical 308, which has a higher RPM. Its damage is low, very low, and especially on its cap shot, it kind of hurts it. That first shot is more than enough to kill still any reds and purples, but yeah. But on the other hand, it does have a 90 RPM, and that is very noticeable. You can actually feel the difference having 30 RPM more, meaning that instead of 60 rounds per, at having 1 round per second, you can have, just underneath 1 round per second, you can have basically 0.75, 1 round per 0.75 of a second. So that is actually a handy thing, but it is quite the damage loss. And this also hurts, for instance, the scalpel. Let's move on, and as we have actually discussed most of their third shots as well, we'll look at it here again. And yeah, we didn't really discuss the Nemesis, but yeah, the Nemesis is just very high. You could very much, of course, start even on an Elite with the Nemesis fully charged, but it has a charging mechanic, of course. And on its cap, it is, of course, unbeatable. It is way high above it, almost double the next one up. But here we see that the Mantis has fallen away, because while it does have that amp, that amp isn't getting stored with Headhunter, because again, it's just the weapon damage, total weapon damage, and DTH that is going into this cap number, that is getting fed into it. And then, of course, the shot that you're taking goes into there as well. That means that, yeah, the Mantis falls behind on the cap shot, not by much. It is still way up there. And then, yeah, the Model 700 has the highest cap shot, both because it has the highest base. On top of that, it has that ability to put the 5 weapon damage in there. And because of that, it is not going to be beat by anything in the high-end class, except, of course, the Nemesis. The SR1, though, it is still high enough that this can kill any named, as they're likely around 20 million-ish, solo especially. This would even be enough likely to kill most names on 2 or 3-man scaling, but likely not on 4-man scaling. And the Model 700 might reach up to that 4-man scaling as well with this 31 million. So it could be, for instance, there, because yeah, it is very situational. It kind of depends how you're playing it. But solo, for instance, both of them have more than enough to kill anything pretty easily or damage them very far. This 31 million actually as well is enough. For instance, that is one difference between them for LMG, especially, for instance, Outcast LMG named. The SR1 will leave them on a sliver. The Model 700 here will outright kill them, but this, of course, with grade 0. The SRSs and the M700 carbons basically line up in the same percentage-wise behind the SR1 again, because they don't have any meaningful differences in, for instance, their weapon damage differences. And yeah, here, for instance, on their cap, they are ahead of their White Death. And that's because, again, that the headshot bonus that the White Death has doesn't go into Headhunter's stored amount. So yeah, they fall behind. The White Death falls way behind here. Although actually, well, I mean, it's basically the same number, but it's now, why would you pick the White Death over any of these? And especially these two, the Model 700 and the SR1. And yeah, the Hunting M44, Custom M44 really don't have anything going for them. And the Tactical 308 does have, of course, that increased rate of fire. But yeah, that cap is just around the part where you can one-shot a named. But of course, this is grade 0. Let's start looking at grade 25, but we're only going to be looking at a limited pool of weapons, 5 of them. So yeah, let's jump into that. And here we're moving on to a shorter list, but with all of them at grade 25. This is again still this variant with the Chainkiller+Airaldi. With the weapons at 25, both the SR1, the Model 700, Nemesis, Mantis, and the White Death. And that does shift it a little bit, as expected, because there is, of course, 2 of the weapons have a +5 weapon damage mod available to them in their magazine slot. That means that they gain a little bit less from grade 25, but just a little bit less. But if we jump in it right away, let's actually compare. And we're comparing again on the second weapon here, where the green one is, that's the 100% point, because again, the Nemesis is such an outlier. And again, on this first shot, again, it is such an outlier. It is 65% above it. The Nemesis, of course, on its first shot here on this grade 25 increases by quite a bit. Here, actually, at the end, these black numbers, these are the percentages versus the earlier ones that we have up here with grade 0. So that is versus grade 0, how much did we gain? And as expected, as we could have just calculated this out with the weapon damages, we can take the weapon damage of the build, add 25 to it, take that number and just divide it by the old number. We would get 9.9%, 9.09%. That's the same number that these go up with, because it is, of course, just a difference in their weapon damage that goes into here. Both of them, of course, gaining 9% from grade 25. It is substantial, especially for instance, as we see here, the Mantis has moved up even more so that if you have hotshot stacked already, if you have the damage component of hotshot, you're definitely one-shotting all non-LMG elite types. But the Model 700 is moving into that range as well. So the Model 700, if you have if you're at the point where you're going to have the damage component from hotshot as well, you can actually start off with an elite. So if you cleared out the previous control point with getting all of, the last few shots all being hits, you can go to the next control point and start off on an elite. So that is actually quite valuable. The SR1 here with this build with Chainkiller+Airaldi isn't reaching that point. So that is a meaningful difference between them because, of course, the SR1 feels a lot better than the Model 700. but the Model 700 can do this on a Chainkiller+Airaldi. That is quite the increase in, yeah. So situationally, I could definitely see that being picked. We have the white death here again, and yeah, the white death is basically here just to, we're just kicking it while it's down, because yeah, the white death to me is basically dead. While of course the white death, it's doing, nothing got nerfed, nothing got moved downwards. It is doing what it was always doing, and what it was always doing was fine. But now we can either take an upgrade either in handleability with the SR1 or in damage with the Model 700. And you get to run one build at a time, and you know, your one weapon is in your hand at a time. I would say make it the best choices you can. And yeah, in my case, I'll mostly be going with SR1s, except for instance with the Habsburg one where I'm trying to go all out with damage. A Model 700 looks pretty nice, and we'll see even its numbers on that Habsburg version. One thing we can look at here on the first shot is, yeah, the weapons that have that +5 weapon damage, they're gaining a little bit less from the grading. They're gaining only, so the other ones are gaining 9.09%. These ones are gaining 8.93%. It is, of course, that isn't a meaningful difference. That is, you know, it's barely 0.1%. But it is, of course, still there. All of them, of course, do benefit from grade 25, and if you can get them to grade 25 or whatever grading you have, this is a build to do it for, because, of course, that weapon damage is getting stored up with the pool of Headhunter that is going into that calculation for it. And that increases especially their last shots by that same number. And that is kind of important here because, yeah, if we go now, again, the Nemesis is just insanely high. It will always be there. The Mantis, of course, is dropping again. It is gaining its damage, especially on that first shot, from mostly its talents. So it is falling behind because its base is so much lower. The Model 700 moves up together with the SR1 over it. And actually now the SR1, even on the Chainkiller+Airaldi variant that we have there, this 31 million is more than enough to kill even LMG names. So the Model 700 has moved way past that now as well, to the point where it is actually reaching the point where it can almost kill rogues on control points in one shot. Now, of course, a Nemesis can do that much better and has a much higher cap. But yeah, the Model 700 will leave them at a one shot, which is very nice in practice with this. And of course, yeah, they're all moving up again by the same amounts, basically, because that's how the calculation it works out. And yeah, this white death again is, well, it was here being here. It's still doing what it always did, but yeah, having 2 million more with a much more handleable weapon, I would, yeah, very much pick the SR1, and I will. And I'll be moving most of my white deaths to be SR1s and Model 700s. Let's move on to the last set of numbers here, which is the same, but now on Habsburg. And let's move on to the last set of numbers. They are based on not the Chainkiller+Airaldi that we had up, but this two-piece Habsburg, in this case as well, with Vigilance. Well, instead of Chainkiller+Airaldi, we have Habsburg with Headhunter, and then Habsburg with Vigilance. With the weapons, though, we have them on different gradings, because on that account, I don't have them all at 25. But that is still, I think, fine, because we're putting the two exotics at grade 12. We're putting the White Dead at grade 20. We don't really care about its number. We're mostly wanting to compare the exotics, kind of how they stack up, and especially what the differences is between the Model 7 and the SR1. And again, here the black numbers exist, and these black numbers are the difference between this set of numbers and the previous set of numbers. So how much do we gain by going Habsburg, and especially on these two grade 25 ones where we've kept them at grade 25 versus each other? Let's start off, though, again, we're, comparing the 100% point is below the Nemesis, because the Nemesis is very, very, very high above the rest. Yeah, it is very much, of course, the 62 million is very nice because, for instance, if you do it right and cap this up right, this is more than enough to kill basically even rogues, even hunters, stuff like that. Now, of course, that requires some setup, but even this 19 million at the start part, especially if this, for instance, was a little bit higher with, you know, that grade 25 was there, this would be maybe enough to one-shot even on the first shot names. I mean, well, it is basically, because if this was around the part where most of the names solo live. So you could even, if for some reason you have lost your stack or something, you would pull out the Nemesis and still one-shot them with a charged shot. That is quite the number. Mantis here again landing pretty high on its first shot, as we're looking first at the first shot between the Mantis, of course, with its amp going in there, exceeds the rest. And this 11 million is, again, it already was above all elites, or well, all non-LMG elites. So you could start off on them, and you can still here, which is very nice. You need to have, of course, vigilance up and that hotshot up, but even because all of these, even without hotshot, yeah, they don't start off with that elite. The Model 700 here again as well is way above it, but now the SR1 on this build actually got grade 25 if you have the hotshot buff ready, and you can actually even go into the range, for instance, if you really want to, and stack it up there, kill a few targets by headshotting them, and then go into the open world. You can't go to safe houses, that resets all your buffs, but if you go to the fast travel points for missions or the fast travel points for classifieds, for instance, you can already, for instance, start with that buff up. And yeah, this SR1 is now reaching the point with this grade 25. It has surpassed the point where most of those elites are also one-shottable. And now you can do it with an SR1, which is very nice. The grade 20 White Death we have here, yeah, it wasn't going to, it hasn't competed so far. And again, it's just, we're just have it here just to kick that poor White Death to death. It's still good. Don't get me wrong. It's doing what it always did. But this SR1 is doing it better now. So you could either go with the Model 700, which has kind of the same characteristics with it, with a somewhat longer reload, although the White Death, of course, has that clip reload when you completely empty it. The Model 700 doesn't have that. You have to always do it per shot. Or that quick reload of the SR1 and still be ahead of it on the first shot. And of course, if we go to the third shot, if we first look at that, because the White Death is getting a lot of its damage from that headshot bonus that it has, it's falling way behind here when it comes to its capped shot, because it isn't based on its weapon damage. But if we go back to the top again, the Nemesis, all the way at the top, of course, it is doubling up. Almost, well, actually, it's close to doubling up against the Model 700. The Model 700 here with 36 million, that's also in the range where it could actually take out the rogues if you get them at the control points in one shot solo. They are around this range-ish, so yeah, it likely can. Otherwise, leaving them definitely on one shot because it was already doing that in the previous one. 32 million on the SR1 here is more than enough to kill LMG heavies or LMG names with one shot. Where the White Death even here was close to it. It would leave them on a sliver usually at grade 20, as I had it here, as I used to run that build. And yeah, the SR1 is very much a beast in that. And the Mantis, of course, dropping down again, but still at 29 million at grade 12. That is still enough to one-shot most names, and yeah, with the exception of likely LMG names. Yeah, so let's actually jump to where a stash is, and we'll go over all of the weapons, and I'll give my final conclusion on all of them. And here we're going to have a brief talk about each of them, give my final thoughts. We're going to leave out things like the Dread Edict and Sacrum and other fast-firing weapons. They are in the burst and sustain tables, and you can kind of compare them on those. Although, of course, here we're really looking at a hotshot build with Headhunter, and they just don't fit into that much. Here we have the Mantis to start off with. The Mantis is really good with its talent. Currently, the scope is broken. Hopefully, in the future, that is not the case if you're watching this in the future. Its first shot amplification is really nice and lets you, for instance, as well, pretty consistently start on elites, especially if you are stacked on hotshot. And it is a very good weapon, and especially once its scope comes back as marking heads is very useful, just even in, for instance, in fog or heavy weather where you just don't have the vision. The Nemesis is, of course, its own thing. It can hit harder than anything else, but also you need to press and hold, meaning that it is kind of harder to, you can't snap fire with it, basically. Now, especially with its ability to have damage to targets out of cover as its third stat, as all of the exotics have gotten that ability, going from crit chance to damage to targets out of cover has made it so much more consistent, because that crit chance, whenever you crit it, it was kind of nice, but especially this damage to targets out of cover is so much more powerful. And yeah, makes it very much my pick for the secondary. I will usually run whatever I'm running in the SR1 or the Model 700, and then pair that with the Nemesis for those moments where I need a really hard-hitting shot now, instead of, capping out. If we move on to the classic M44, the classic M44 is the base weapon for the White Death, and because of that, it is basically useless. You really don't have a use for it, because anything this can do, the White Death will do better, but now as well, the White Death is, I would say, no longer a general pick. I would definitely pick an SR1 over it in all cases. If we then move on to the Covert SRS and the SRS A1, as both of them share the stats, the SRS A1 does have a long rail where the Covert SRS doesn't, but that isn't the meaningful difference for these, for sniper rifles. Both of them, to me, are below the SR1 in their abilities, and they don't meaningfully perform better in their handling or such. They have a little bit better accuracy base, or just when you use them on hotshot, but that isn't a meaningful difference for that damage loss. So I am just going to be picking SR1s. If we then move on to the classic M44 or the custom M44, it is very much a dead bird. It doesn't do anything that the others can do, because even the Covert SRS and the SRSs and the M700s have more damage than it. It is basically doesn't do anything meaningfully better than anything else. One standard as well that I wanted to point out is, of course, with the Model 700 becoming the new top dog, ECIMs, especially with Perfect Ranger as it has. Ranger is, of course, a really good pick anyway for sniper rifles, and yeah, Perfect Ranger is very good. It is decreasing this from 5 meters to 4 meters per 2%, and yeah, if you're not going determined, an ECIMs very much stands out. The hunting M44 has the same issues as the custom M44, even though it does have that integral magazine where you can put a 5 weapon damage. Elevating it a little bit over that one. It is a 5-round weapon. It doesn't do anything better than the Model 700. It is kind of capped to the same things. It does have a long rail, but yeah, that's not going to make the difference there. Moving to the M700 Carbon, and together actually with the M700 Tactical, as both of them share stats, even though the mods are different. The M700 Carbon does get a long rail. The Tactical gets a side slot, which is actually something that mostly only SMGs and pistols get. But there aren't really any meaningful things you could put there to make the difference. And to me, again, the SR1 is this, but better. There is, unless you have nostalgia from Division 1, as I keep hearing over and over again, I wouldn't pick these. I would pick an SR1. Then we have the Model 700s, and as you can see here, I'm starting to build up a collection of them as I'm starting to gear up my characters to have Model 700s and SR1s. And this is very much the new king. This is what the White Death used to be, and especially if you were happy with the White Death, you'll likely be a little bit happier with this. It is worth upgrading. It is, of course, a farm, but keep in mind that marksman rifles is a much smaller pool than, for instance, ARs and such. So you'll get the weapons, you'll get more of the same weapons more often. There is less trash in it. The pool is smaller, so you're more likely to hit the one that you're looking for. And yeah, especially having the determined ones is free talentable detox ones, especially, are going to go into a bunch of my characters. Then if we move on to the SR1, the SR1 is my other pick. It is the usability pick, and I will likely as well put this on a lot of my characters. It is in handling so much better. With these two stability mods on there, it has no sway at all. You can just pinpoint accurately, put it on the target. If you have the weapon handling pieces as well, so if you have 4 pieces of hotshot, where you're getting the bonus weapon handling, and of course the 2 pieces, for instance, as well with Habsburg have the weapon handling, then it's pinpoint accurate. It is also, it has no sway, which is very, very nice. Not having any sway at all, having the scope just not sway out, is something that you owe to yourself if you like sniping to try out. And yeah, it is very, very handy for that. And of course, yeah, it comes with a 10-round mag. That helps as well a lot. And being a mag lets me use this, for instance, on some of the builds where, for instance, in the past, a white death was annoying because they didn't have a reload mechanic. For instance, the high-end hotshot third drone hybrid, which was an oddity. That, for instance, now having a weapon like this that hits as hard as a white death, but has a magazine, so you don't have to deal with that super long reload, is very nice. That leaves us only with the white death. Actually, let's do that one first. The white death, yeah, it's sad, but the white death is it died. It is now the white dead. Yeah, it would be nice if it maybe in the future got maybe a little bit of a buff. It is a named item. It should be competitive. It very much isn't now at this point. I would definitely pick an SR1 over this. There's no reason to take the hits in handleability and such over this. The one nice thing about it still, though, is that it does come with 1 stat max. So for newer players, it might be worth it to go for this because you're very likely to get a capped out one, especially if you're getting into countdowns. And with the final hunters dropping 8 named items, you'll likely run into a white death that maybe has its stats maxed out, and especially one of its stats is always going to be maxed out in that headshot, meaning that, you know, for that, if you get a detox one, you can just put talent here. It's good enough still, but yes, if you're really going out and setting up a build, I wouldn't pick it anymore. Then we have the Tactical 308, and it's named the Scalpel, of course. The oddity of having 30 RPM more is actually a beneficial thing, especially if you're just snapshotting with Headhunter, especially if you're also, for instance, not going with a scope. Although its cap is reaching a point where, yeah, you're going to 2-shot a named. You need to put a second shot into a named. That kind of hurts it, and it will never reach the point where it can one-shot an elite, for instance, to start off with. It can, of course, one-shot an elite once it gets going. But yeah, it kind of is down there in the damage. But yeah, I feel there is some value there, but I wouldn't outright recommend it. And of course, as always, the best weapon in this is the O'Carroll still. I mean, who cares that it is still a classic M44? It is the best weapon because it twinkles your lights. Although, yeah, actually, honestly, this being a white death as well, basically. Without the talent, it got a little bit worse. So, well, I mean, it's still the same, but situationally, it has gotten worse. But yeah, there we went through all of the sniper rifles. I hope the marksman rifles. I hope something was gained by you from it. As yeah, it is quite interesting how much they have gone up, especially versus the white deaths, and because of that, we have basically increased our caps and our first shots. The white death, of course, is still doing what it always did, but now there's so many more weapons above it, meaning that, yeah, there's even more benefit in, for instance, a hotshot determined, hotshot headhunter determined. And yeah, that's the Habsburg version being just a few % ahead does make it valuable, does make it quite the increase. As yeah, that 5% extra can be the difference between one-shotting that elite or not. For me personally, though, I'll be keeping my main account ones with Chainkiller+Airaldi, as I do feel you basically need watchouts for Habsburg, and I don't have the ability to do those here. But yeah, all of the things shown, of course, are available in the burst and sustain tables, and will be linked down below as well. And next up, we're going to be discussing rifles as an in-depth look, but in between it, there's likely going to be things and stuff, and maybe a build overview as well, as I want to continue doing those, maybe actually as well on the hotshot determinant. We'll move on to rifles as the next in-depth look. So yeah, I hope you join me for those, and if you enjoyed this video and are willing to help out, maybe doing all of the algorithm stuffs down below, you know what they are. I'm not going to go into them. Yeah, as always, have a good night.